Okay, well, thank you, Liz, for the introduction, and welcome everyone from my side as well. It's a great honor to be presenting my research at this seminar today. And yeah, before starting, I would also really like to thank the evaluation committee for recognizing my work. And obviously, I would also like to acknowledge my co-authors and their contributions, because none of this work would have been possible without them. In this talk, I'm going to present parts of the content of the paper that has been awarded and also some of the follow-up research that resulted from it. So I'm going to talk about forest snow modeling and take you away from this ocean setting to land. And I assume that to many of you in the audience, forest snow may not be the most typical cryospheric research topic. However, as we can see from these two Northern Hemisphere maps showing March snow cover and the forest ecoregions, there is a large spatial overlap between the two. And so it's quite a relevant topic, actually. And so in boreal regions, for instance, forest snow is a major control on land atmosphere energy exchange, with further impacts, for example, on snow albedo climate feedbacks and on permafrost dynamics. At mid-latitude regions, snow from forested headwaters may represent a vital water resource that millions of people rely on, and it's thus a major eco-hydrological component. So the topic is also becoming particularly relevant nowadays that both snow cover extents and forest structure are rapidly changing. And so understanding the combined impacts of these changes is key to shaping resilient systems and societies. And process-based models can really help us with that, but to do so, they need to represent all the relevant forest snow processes reliably. And as illustrated in this sketch, there are quite a few processes involved. So the trees shade the below snow surface from shortwave radiation, they emit longwave radiation, they attenuate wind, and they may intercept snowfall. So really the presence of the canopy affects all the energy and mass balance terms of the below snowpack. And unfortunately, representing these processes in models is not that simple. And the reason for that can nicely be illustrated with these three images. So these show a pretty small area at a field site here next to Davos on 3 days throughout the snow season. And what you can immediately see is that all of the processes involved here show very large spatial variability at very small spatial scales. And this obviously translates to heterogeneous snowpack properties and also heterogeneous land surface properties. And now in any typical model situation, this area would be contained in one single grid cell. And so this obviously brings about quite a large modeling challenge. So how do we capture this variability in models? Does it matter at all? And traditional models don't really account for it. So if you take these two grid cells as example, they both have the same amount of canopy on it, but it's arranged differently. And traditional models would treat these two grid cells as the same. But is this assumption justified? Well, ourselves, we have carried out an empirical study that actually showed that it's not. And so our modeling work has tried to just improve our modeling capabilities to better account for this situation. And now to understand our approach, it's essential to appreciate that model improvement has traditionally been limited by observations. So we can't really observe forest snow processes at the scales at which we want to model them. Most current remote sensing techniques are not very applicable to forest snow. And if we measure any variable at fixed stations, so with stationary sensors, these sensors may not capture really representative grid cell averages. So there is really a scale gap between our measurements and our model resolution. And this has so far quite hampered effective model development and validation. And now our approach to tackle this problem has been to break it up into two steps. So in the first part, we tried to really explore ways to model forest snow processes at scales that could be directly compared with our observations. And then in a second step, we wanted to use what we learned at these very, very small spatial scales and scale up to the coarser resolution of real world applications. I'm going to detail these two steps a bit more in the following. So the first step tackled really the explicit representation of forest snow process variability. And that first required us to understand how individual processes relate to canopy structure. And well, to investigate this, we designed novel instrumentation, which is shown here. So the device that you see here is a motorized cable car system that carries a variety of meteorological sensors and also a camera. And now this device can move back and forth along this along transects in discontinuous forest. And as it does so, it captures both the temporal and the spatial variability of all the measured variables. Here you see an example of variability patterns that we observed over a day in incoming shortwave radiation, for instance. And now, since the cable car also captures images of the canopy, we obtain information that we can reference to the meteorological measurements. And like that, we obtain information about the spatial and temporal variability of multiple variables and how it relates to canopy structure. We deployed the cable car at different sites, covering a large range of canopy structures and meteorological conditions. And with that, we created a quite unique data set, multi-dimensional data set, I should say. And this is really complementary to traditional stationary sensors. Now, for modeling, we used the flexible snow model, FSM2, which is a standalone point model. So in a forest setting, such a model is driven by meteorological data that represents above canopy conditions, and then their transfer to atmospheric conditions seen at the snow surface is handled in the model by solving coupled equations of the energy balance of the canopy and the snow. And to quantify the canopy impacts on all these processes, the model needs to be given some parameters that describe the canopy. So our goal was to run point simulations along for instance, every cable car transect, and so that we could directly compare model output to our multidimensional data sets. And when we did that with an initial version of FSM2 that really matches standard forest snow models, the results obviously weren't that great, as you can see here. So we have 4 measured variables, and in the second line you see what the model produced, and obviously the individual variability patterns of the processes are not quite captured. And inspired by these results and by the patterns we found in the cable car data, we then tackled some model improvements. And our key enhancement was to use process-specific canopy structure metric. And this is a concept that I want to outline a bit more in detail. So the original version of FSM2 that I said matches standard forest snow models, uses just one parameter to describe all the processes. It's this leaf area index, which can be obtained from hemispherical images at the point. However, if you consider different processes are affected by canopy structure in different scales and perspectives. So if you take precipitation, for instance, that's an essentially vertical process, and it's just affected by the canopy directly above a point. If you take diffuse solar radiation or long-wave radiation, it's affected by the canopy seen in the full 180-degree hemispherical view. And then if you think of direct solar radiation, so direct solar radiation really depends on, or the transmission of direct solar radiation, I should say, really depends on the exact geometric arrangement of sun and canopy at any specific point in time. And this obviously changes as the sun moves along the solar track. And so if the canopy is described by just one metric, there is no way to account for all these differences. And so we therefore decided to diversify the canopy structure input to FSM. And in particular, we coupled FSM to an external radiation transfer model based on hemispherical image analysis. This means that for every point that we modeled, we first ran the hemispherical image through an analysis software that overlaid the sun track and the image at any point in time. And like that, it obtained a time series of canopy transmissivity for shortwave radiation. And we then directly fed this time-varying transmissivity to FSM2. With this approach, we were really able to incorporate the very complex process of shortwave radiation transfer in a quite simple way. And we allowed, in general, every process to see the scale and perspective relevant to it. And now, the positive impacts of these enhancements are quite obvious if you look at the simulations performed with this enhanced FSM version. So now the individual variability patterns of the different processes are well captured, and notably also their interactions. So you see, for instance, how the imprints of the shortwave radiation patterns are seen in the snow surface temperature. And consequently, the model now also achieved to capture snow distribution in quite complex canopy settings. So here we're looking at observations and model results over a quite large area of this continuous forest with large gaps. And you can see that there is a very distinct meltout gradient from north to south across the large gap, and the model captures that well. And if you consider the 3 images that I show nearby, these images really explain an increase in subcanopy incoming total radiative energy that is obviously well captured by the model now. And so with these results, we are now confident that we know how to successfully represent forest snow processes explicitly at hyper resolutions. And now it's time to investigate how we can do that implicitly at coarser resolution. And now the really cool thing is that we can use this hyper resolution model to explore this question. And for that, we conduct so-called upscaling experiments. And the concept of these upscaling experiments is pretty simple. So we use the hyper resolution model that I just presented, and now we apply it to evenly spaced simulations we did 2-meter resolution over quite a large domain here next to close to Davos. And now to do so, we need to leverage a methodology to create synthetic hemispherical images that is based on LiDAR data. And obviously, by creating synthetic hemispherical images, we are no longer bound to locations where we have real images, and we can perform fully distributed simulations of shortwave radiation transmissivity to create this transmissivity time series to provide to the model. Here you see an example of shadow patterns calculated with this LiDAR-based radiation model. And now the resulting hyper-resolution simulations are sort of our best estimate of the fully resolved spatial and temporal variability of all the forest snow processes, and also of the resulting snow distribution. And so we, so to say, replace process level observations that would not exist over these spatial extents. And we can now use these simulations to create or to derive meaningful spatial averages. And then we perform coarse resolution simulations across the same model domain. And in these simulations, we represent the same, we represent 50 by 50 meter grid cells with just one model run. And now we use spatially aggregated canopy properties. And we can assess these coarse resolution simulations against the spatially averaged hyper-resolution runs to evaluate our different modeling strategies. So we looked at 4 different coarse resolution modeling strategies that I don't really want to go into detail here. But essentially, these 4 strategies differed by how they implicitly account for either canopy structure variability or snow cover variabilities, and also for interactions between the two. And their complexity ranges from not accounting for variability at all in strategy 1 to accounting for interactions in strategy 4, so they're increasingly complex. And here, I just want to give you a visual impression of some results of our upscaling experiment. So what do we have? To the far left, we have a canopy height map of our model domain, and then the fully resolved and the spatially averaged hyper-resolution simulations. And we see snow water equivalent at peak of winter and snow disappearance state for a specific year. And on the right, you can see the same computed by the coarse resolution runs. And by just comparing these visually, we can see that strategy 3 is the first strategy to match both SWE at peak of winter and snow disappearance state properly. So it's kind of our sweet spot in the trade-off between model complexity and model accuracy. And so from this simple modeling exercise, we are able to identify features that are pertinent to successful coarse resolution simulations. So in this case, these features are the features that characterize strategy 3. So what did we do there? We simply performed spatial averages of all the process-specific canopy metrics used in the hyper-resolution simulations. Especially also, we averaged the time-varying transmissivity for shortwave radiation and provided it to the model. And like that, we implicitly accounted for canopy structure variability. Moreover, we also introduced fractional snow cover. Fractional snow cover is important to weigh melt energy as the ablation progresses and partial snow cover starts happening. And so with the fractional snow cover parameterizations, we also implicitly accounted for snowpack heterogeneity. And so results from this experiment show us that coarse resolution models should include both these 2 features. And now with that, these recommendations derived from the experiments set us up for accurate forest snow process simulations at coarse resolution that are actually feasible in real-world applications. And here, as a summary, you see again our whole workflow. I would like to conclude this talk by presenting an ongoing application to show how we are putting these research findings into practice. So at SLF, our group runs a snow hydrological service that is tasked to issue daily snow water equivalent, new snow and snowmelt distribution products over the whole winter season and for whole Switzerland. And now the forest snow modeling approaches derived from this research are being integrated into the modeling chain of this service. And this is going to hopefully improve the quality of these products over forested areas, which constitute no less than 1/3 of Switzerland. And now the cool thing is that based on our research finding, we can operate at multiple resolutions. So we have, as you see up here, countrywide LiDAR data at quite high point density, and we can use this LiDAR data to run the radiation transfer model and to calculate canopy structure metrics. And we do that at high spatial resolution, so at 10 meters. And obviously, this is very computationally intensive, but we can do it offline because these calculations do not depend on meteorological input. And now we can aggregate the information obtained at this high resolution to the spatial resolution of our snow model, which is 250 meters. And this model is then run over the season based, driven by forcing meteorological data from numerical weather prediction, COSMO, downscaled to these 250 meters. And by directly taking the aggregated information, we obviously massively reduce the computational burden, but we're still able to incorporate this detailed process representation in our operational product. So this is somewhat an efficient trick to incorporate these processes. And I'm very happy that it's planned to go operational next year, and that so our research is creating an added value to end users. And so this is an example of a hydrological application, but enhanced modeling capabilities are certainly beneficial in other fields as well. That's all from my side. I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take questions.